Hey, I think I am the only member of my biological family that has sought any type of diagnosis for mental illness or done deep research into the correlation of illness related to our exposure to coal mining activities in West Virginia. As I have been having an extended conversation with ChatGPT about it, I have become so frustrated that my brain is cramping. And what I can tell you for sure is my family has deep roots in West Virginia, and my mother was born in 1957. I was born in 1973. My grandmother was born, I believe, in the 30s. Welch, West Virginia is historically one of the most active coal mining counties in West Virginia. When this activity started, the EPA did not exist. What I can express to you is that the water was not drinkable. And even though we tried to avoid drinking it as much as possible, and my grandmother and I would go collect spring water and to distribute and share, because my grandmother was very service oriented, is that we still bathed in that toxic slough of heavy metals and bio waste. And as I have been sitting here talking to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT, of course, is talking in circles and wanting to find historical data. I expressed to ChatGPT that my silent generation great-grandparents and my boomer grandparents and mother did not go to the doctor, and people would just drop dead and there would be no autopsy, only a funeral. There is only so much gaslighting that this human can take. Because coal mining has destroyed my entire family and all of our interpersonal relationships. And then when you add in that extra layer of moralizing everything, so what I decided to ask Chat was, can you find any, not just relative to West Virginia, can you find any peer-reviewed studies that link rates of violence to heavy metals? Yes, in fact, there is now a substantial peer-reviewed literature on the topic. The strongest evidence is for lead, with more limited but growing evidence for manganese. The evidence for arsenic and violence specifically is much weaker. No, that is probably where the disassociation stems from. Because there are two sides to this fucking shithole story that Americana is built on, and one is where everybody is narcissistic and histrionic, or disassociative and completely spaced the fuck out. I did a not Facebook, sorry. I get upset and my executive functioning does not function. It is very hard for me to talk about. Because of all of it being shrouded in secrecy, shame, moralizing, histrionics, abandonment, violence, chronic illness, early death. Let's see. Chronic IBS, PCOS, extreme mood swings or disassociation, paranoid schizophrenia, cancer, diabetes, magical thinking, and the complete destruction of my entire family. There are things that I want to talk about, but I feel like they are not my stories to tell. You know, I have a great uncle named Dexter, and he has several children, and Dexter is on the disassociative Jesus end of the spectrum, and he has sons that have been moralized instead of taken to the doctor, and who have done extreme acts of self-inflicted harm, self-harm, like jumping out of high windows of apartments, like completely cutting off their entire family, like wild mood swings. I have a cousin that I love dearly, and she was abandoned by her father, Dexter, and her mother was extremely violent. And then when you add the next layer of being a daughter, you don't fucking matter. And she has children that she loves dearly, and they are extremely autistic. And she related that to the Fukushima, I believe I'm pronouncing it. West Virginia is a nuclear waste pit of heavy metals and bio waste. This is so upsetting to me that I can barely talk about it. I can barely talk about it because I have paid a human cost for this, but I also live in a world in the South, in a disassociative complex PTSD trauma where I've never been able to land in my body and in my experience and talk about it with members of my own family because it's like Lord of the fucking Flies. You're either in or you're out. You're either favored or you're cast aside. And the behavior is extremely narcissistic. And instead of caring for each other, my family gossips and makes light of it. You know, the female cousin I have a female cousin named Jenny who has lived a life of abandonment, physical violence, neglect, addiction. Her grandson is in prison for shaking a baby to death. And I can promise you that she is paranoid schizophrenic. Deeply disassociative. Was in a relationship with a man that was married, lived with the man, and his wife was basically their sex slave. And my family made fun of her instead of holding any type of intervention. And her siblings were also as physically, mentally, and emotionally sick as you can imagine when you have drank leaded water and been violently abused and abandoned by every system that exists in the United States of America. Chat kept wanting to look for peer-reviewed articles. And every time I talk about my lived experiences, my it's word salad. It's fucking word salad. Lead and antisocial behavior. Researchers screened more than 15,000 papers and ultimately reviewed 43 human epidemiology studies and 37 animal studies. Their conclusion was the evidence indicates a likely causal association between childhood lead exposure and later antisocial behavior. With somewhat weaker evidence specifically for aggression. That's from 2025. Okay, here's a for 2023 systematic review, lead exposure and crime. Researchers reviewed every peer-reviewed study they could identify examining individual lead exposure and later violent crime, delinquency, aggression, and criminal behavior. Their conclusion, the overall body of evidence supports an association between childhood lead exposure and later criminal and antisocial behavior, although the magnitude of the effect varies across studies. Heavy metals and aggression in adolescents. This is from 2023. The study measured actual blood plasma and urine concentrations of heavy metals in 228 adolescents. Higher aggression scores were significantly associated with higher levels of lead, manganese, and mercury. Cadmium did not show the same relationship studies. What about manganese? Manganese is less studied than lead, but researchers have found association between elevated manganese exposure and poorer impulse control, executive function deficits, attention problems, behavioral dysregulation, increased aggression scores in some population. Arsenic. Lower IQ, impaired executive functioning, neurodevelopmental effects, memory, and attention problems, especially after prenatal and childhood exposure. It's not the fucking vaccines. That is so fucking ridiculous. When you look at a micro dose in a vaccine and bathing and drinking poisonous water, now let's go back generations of it. I would suggest that that type of behavior manifests differently in women than it does men, where men hop around and leave a family system and go create another family system and or like all the men that my mom women are not socialized to externalize anger through violence. But my mother did. She violently beat me and my sisters. But she also did a lot of other self-harm behavior. Right? And it was moralized. And she was triggered during puberty. Do you know what happens when you become pregnant? Do you know how many hormones flood? Antisocial behavior isn't just manifested in verbal aggression or physical aggression. It can manifest as going and finding someone that will regulate your life for you, because humans are constantly trying to seek homeostasis. I could read all these statistics about the mortality rate in Appalachia, but y'all don't fucking care. I could talk about how it destroyed my family, how my two youngest children were always disassociative. I could talk about my first memory being in an oxygen tent. I could talk about having bronchitis so severe that I thought I was going to die, but y'all don't care. I could talk about the rates of people in my family that have OCD, PCOS, IBS. But y'all don't care. I could talk about the cluster of serial killers in the Pacific Northwest a lady named Caroline Fraser, who is a Pulitzer Prize winning author, wrote a story that talks about the extraordinary concentration of serial killers in the Tacoma-Seattle corridor that may have been influenced by unusually high childhood exposure to neurotoxic pollutants, particularly lead and arsenic, from the ASARCO Tacoma smelter. And this book, which is titled Murderland, discusses several notorious killers who spent childhood or adolescence in the region, including Ted Bundy, Gary Ridgway, Randall Woodfield, and even Charles Manson briefly. The book has historical maps of industrial pollution, emission records, childhood residence histories of the offenders, environmental histories of the Pacific Northwest, impaired executive function, increased impulsivity, aggression, higher rates of violent crime decades later. I don't want to be on this fucking planet anymore. I don't know why I even have a drive to do this human thing, because we are in a vat of oil cooking ourselves and letting the worst people imaginable run it. And we are still so egocentric and obsessed with optics that the pettiest of the petty get the most fucking attention and win the prize. I feel sick. I feel fucking sick. I had a discussion yesterday with a 36-year-old black man who is extremely successful. He just completed his MBA. He is the product of a single family, of a single mother. He has one brother. His family, his mom and his two brothers are very tight-knit, but they really don't have other extended successful relationships, and I can extremely relate to that. Except I don't have any family that is tight-knit. Because I'm not attention seeking, and I do not buy people. And he and I had a long discussion, and he was talking about his frustration with dating, and he's not had a lot of relationships. He's done everything by the books, and he is extremely frustrated that things are not working out the way that they should when it comes to women, and that he dated a very successful black corporate attorney, and he was trying to keep up with her expectations. So he was working 2 jobs. And she still out-earned him, but as long as he was working 2 jobs, he was adequate, just adequate. He lost one of the jobs, and her behavior immediately became passive-aggressive. And petty. And she was constantly trying to bait him into unhealthy dynamics. But he has a regulated nervous system, and he didn't take the bait. He left the relationship. And then he dated another black woman who baited him into unhealthy dynamics. And she ended up cutting him with a knife across his chest and then calling the police, where he was arrested and taken to jail. And then released. And then he dated a Latina woman who told him that she didn't feel that spark. And this woman also was socialized through histrionic, unhealthy behavior. And she didn't bait him into unhealthy dynamics. She just told him that she did not feel the spark. And I explained to him that the spark is unhealthy dynamics, because humans have been socialized across all cultures. I'm not talking about this situation because he's black. I'm talking about it because he's honest and he's heartfelt and he wants to understand why nothing he is doing is good enough, and why it is so hard to have a natural connection where he's not expected to endure humiliation rituals. And I expressed that I have experienced the same behavior in my family, in my relationships with my mother, in my relationships with my children, with my exes. Because humans are not socialized with healthy dynamics. That is a figment of the imagination. Humans are apex predators that love mythology and creating a universe that is central to them, where they even murder themselves for entertainment. I am personally going to put 10 toes down and stand on business and say that the matriarchy is not the cure. Because what women do is they either fawn for attention and bribe, or they perform humiliation rituals. The matriarchy and the patriarchy are the same fucking monster. Who do you think raises all of these PDF files and rapists and violent offenders? Who do you think turns the other fucking eye? I am the only woman I know that has spoken openly about my sons and their behavior. I'm not going to normalize bad behavior. I'm not going to normalize incompetent behavior. I am not going to normalize sociopathic abandonment. I am not going to humiliate myself and blame myself for shit that I did not fucking do. I'm not going to normalize using drones to drop bombs on Middle Eastern people because I'm white. the best treatment that I've ever had as a woman on this planet came from a Middle Eastern man who was nurturing. And not derelict of his duties as a husband or a father, though he did allow a lot of weaponized incompetence from his youngest son, and he never gave up on him. After spending a childhood internalizing all of the violence and poverty that I experienced and completely disassociating from myself, but also associating to the pain and suffering of other people, I was conditioned through Hollywood to protect, quote unquote, weaker people. And that led to me a anemic, anxiety-ridden, B12 deficient girl who lived in constant threat of violence to fly into action to protect my homosexual friends, my poor friends, and my black friends. Because I hate to watch people punch down. But now that I'm older and I have taken inventory, as we should, I am understanding that my homosexual friends all had flying monkey mothers that coddled them and babied them, and that my black friends had healthier family units than I did. And that where I needed to actually land was in my own body and in my own nervous system and in what was actually happening to me. And now that it's 2026 and we're still in the middle of a Cold War racially fueled gender-based petty culture obsessed with optics and edgelording. I'm ashamed of all of you. I'm ashamed of everybody. I'm ashamed of my race. I'm ashamed of every other race. I'm ashamed of my gender. I'm ashamed of men. You do not give a single fuck about another living soul, and whatever it is you're going on the internet to align yourself with, it doesn't matter, because that is not an actual act of heroism. That is literally the equivalent of thoughts and fucking prayers. Well, Lisa, what are you doing? Well, Lisa has been poisoned by heavy metals, violence, suicides, incest, poverty. What more is Lisa supposed to fucking do? And I would like to direct this statement to William Bradford Minard, who is the father of my daughter Ava. You and I know that you also grew up in a toxic waste dump, and that your mother's behavior was extremely antisocial, OCD, animal hoarding, trash hoarding. You did not even want me to meet her. You also hoard animals. You also have violent tendencies and antisocial behavior. Do you remember the conversation we had about my ex-husband, where you literally described the fucking torture tactics that you would like to do, where he would be strapped to a chair and you would slowly cut chunks out of his body, and I was stunned because he had harmed me. But you were very, very, very aligned with sadomasochistic violence. Go get Ava tested, not just for autism, hormone levels, heavy metals, yourself. You talk to me about your brother brushing his teeth so much that he removed the enamel from them. Is there a possibility? Is there anywhere in you the possibility that your antisocial and sadistic behavior is extremely exacerbated to growing up in a fucking chemical stew in fucking New Jersey, where your father also handled tires and constantly breathed in particulate matter? Can we please talk about the environment in a real way? I'm so fucking disgusted. Because all of this antisocial, Machiavellian, narcissistic behavior has been completely normalized. And pettiness is ran by armies of flying monkeys. Because tribalism is real. Fuck!